Hi everyone and welcome. We're down here in my wormery, and in front of me I've got my Vermibag Mini. Inside my Vermibag Mini I've got Nightcrawlers. These are European Nightcrawlers. And if you've been following along, you'll know that the last time we were in here we were attempting to try to reduce the number of flying insects that I've been observing in this bin. Every time I open it up I always get a little bit of a swarm of gnats or fruit flies or something like that. So a week ago I had placed a little trap in here. So today we're going to get to see how it's doing. It's a little different from the way we left it a week ago, because originally I had placed it in there with just some vinegar in it, and to sweeten the deal I added a piece of banana. So you could see that it is actually working. It's beginning to attract some insects. A number of them have actually made their way into the liquid and have met their demise. And a whole bunch more are just lying here dead on the cardboard, which is something we've noticed already in the past a few times coming in here. But it's these ones that kind of swarm into your face when you open the container that I'm wishing we could get rid of. So I don't know if this is the beginning of the end for them, if this is going to continue to work, but I mean, I'm going to put this right back in the way we found it at the end, because it does seem to be capturing some of them. Whether it has the potential to wipe them all out or not, I have no idea. But for now, I guess I'll continue, because it does seem to be working. I've gotten a lot of great input from people as well on the channel on different other approaches that I could possibly use to get rid of these bugs. So we'll see if we have to step it up to some other measures. But for now, we're just in here to feed. So we'll try to avoid these insects and disregard them for now, in the hopes that we'll have at some point a solution for it. But let's get things uncovered here so we can feed. So going down one level, we can still see a little bit of a swarm. It's never really gotten beyond this, but this is already annoying enough, I think. I guess once I get to work in here, they usually dissipate, kind of fly out into the room and leave. You know, it would be nice just to be rid of them, I gotta admit. So our European Nightcrawlers look quite happy. They are just all over the place here. They're crawling all over the newspaper. This was a fresh piece of newspaper that we placed in here when was it? A week ago. It was a week ago that we came in here last to feed these worms. And besides that nice fresh sheet of newspaper on top, there were a number of food items added to the bin. If you watched the video, you'll know that we had created sort of a little triangular shape here, and even without removing the newspaper, I can already see there's 3 distinct lumps here. And then I believe there was a banana peel filling those voids. But what we're seeing here, these lumps are what's remaining, I guess, of the mango. We had taken an entire mango, which is a pretty good sized piece of fruit, and hacked it into 3 slices or 3 pieces using my saw. I pulled it out of the refrigerator freezer, and while it was still frozen, it was pretty easy to handle, and I was able to saw through it. That included sawing through the pit of the mango. So the pit is in there still, but you could see I've sliced right through the center of it, and there's actually a fragment of the pit in each section that I placed in here. So in most of my bins, whenever I put a mango in there, the mango a lot of times has the whole pit in there, and the whole pit takes forever before the worms actually infiltrate the outer thick husk of the shell and make their way into the inside. And it's the inside that I think that they really like, because they just gobble up the insides of one of these things once they get in. But I figured this way they have direct access to it right off the bat. There's still a good amount of food in here, you know, if you look at it that way. Well, maybe not. I guess maybe it's just kind of turning to mush, to goo. I'm not sure. It does feel like there's still a good amount here. I don't see a huge worm party surrounding it either. So I kind of figured it would take a few days to start breaking down before the worms start to really take advantage of it, but maybe it's still a bit too early. Out here, these three sections between the mango pieces is banana. Now that I'm kind of scraping all of the newspaper and other things off the top of each of these pieces of fruit, I'm starting to get a little bit of a whiff of the fruit smell. Not too much, but I'm sure that that's one of the main reasons we've got flying insects coming, because they can sense that food source. It is giving out a pretty distinct, yummy aroma. Something down here a little different. Oh, okay. It's the end of a piece of vegetable. It's interesting because that stuff was pretty hard and it's really mushy now. And a lot of it has been depleted. You can already see it's down to just fibers fanning out from the center. So I think we've given ourselves a pretty good sense of how this past feeding from a week ago is progressing. And I believe that my hunch on this one for this week's feeding is going to be correct. And my hunch was basically to not come down here with a huge mound of food, because I had a funny feeling that what I gave them last week, banana peel and mango and other things that they were given in addition to those things, that was going to last them a little while. So I always like to backfill. I always like to throw in a little bit more food just so that material has its chance to begin breaking down, and that at some point in the future, a few weeks down the road, it will be available as food for the worms. But I'm definitely going to apply much less now than I usually do. Maybe before we put the food in, or at least the small food scraps, let's put in some grit. I just have this feeling that the grit is something that helps the food go away a little bit more quickly. Throw a little coffee on top too. I guess the nice thing about the coffee is that it helps mask the smell. There's quite a bit there we dumped in. It kind of helps mask the smell a little bit of stuff that would normally give off a pretty distinct, strong odor. So maybe it'll help a little bit in keeping the smell of this fruity stuff down. I'm dropping in one handful here, but it's mostly leafy, thin stuff. So I'm going to go with the second small handful. And I think that should be plenty for today. I think that'll do. And since none of this is really such that you can cover much with it anymore, we'll do what we can, spread it out a little bit, but I'm wondering if I've got a piece of newspaper laying around that I could potentially use to replace this. Whatever it is that ends up being right here on top of the food has the plastic on top of it, and all the plastic is collecting all of the moisture that evaporates up out of the material onto the plastic and condenses back down. So whatever is right under the plastic is always going to get a lot of the attention of the worms, because it's going to be where the majority of the moisture in the bin is located. I know it's just another layer of cardboard, but it's really mangled. It's been soaked, it's been stained, it's coming apart, it's all delaminating. I think this will be perfect material for the collection of moisture. Once it gets all damp, it's going to probably become the spot where the worms all come up to enjoy the moisture. It's a little tougher too. So, in addition to the European Nightcrawlers getting fed here today, we're going to be revisiting the African Nightcrawlers. Now, we haven't seen the African Nightcrawlers in a couple weeks, ever since we harvested their castings and relocated the population into a new container. And, in all honesty, I've not even peeked into there, so I'll be curious to see how things are progressing in there. We'll give them some food, and hopefully everything's going good. Can hardly wait to be rid of these flying insects. Alright, let's get on to the African Nightcrawlers. So here we have the container that we had placed our African Nightcrawlers into 2 weeks ago. It was a freshly made bin for them. We had collected them out of my Vermibag tote, which is where they had spent their past few months. We collected all of their castings and took the remainder of what was in that container, which was pretty much worms and a little bit of extra material that came along for the ride. And they've been in here undisturbed for the past 2 weeks. You can already see there's one or two of them cruising around on the top, but they're going to try to take shelter from this light overhead. So let's see what we can see if we start peeling back the curtain here. Let's see how our African Nightcrawlers are doing. See one or two right there on the paper, but not too many. Hopefully they'll just drop right off. It's a pretty good sized stick. We got some corn cobs here. Let's get a little bit closer look here. The only reason I had this other container, the yellow container here, was because I had set this aside. This was the material that got caught in the sifter when I was separating the worms from their castings, and I was sifting all the material. This was all the stuff that was too big to go through the sifter, and I got a feeling it was just chock full of African Nightcrawler cocoons. I didn't see any worms, but I've got this funny feeling that within a couple weeks we're going to start seeing a whole bunch of tiny baby African Nightcrawlers in here. So that's the reason I held on to this. Not to mention the fact that this was also a whole bunch of sifted stuff that was still their food and their bedding from the previous container that they occupied. So I was hoping to also possibly use this stuff in future feedings. But then again, if this ends up spawning off into a new container just based on cocoon hatchings, then so be it. Maybe this will be my, second African Nightcrawler bin. Maybe now I'll have two. So we're going to play it by ear on this one. We'll see how it goes. Let's see if we can get a little bit closer here on these ANCs. Let's see what we can see. In the past 2 weeks, they've done a nice job leaving a nice thin film of fresh castings across the top of the surface here. We had that piece of plastic covering the container, which has enabled the moisture to remain in the bin. So much escapes through evaporation. I was really surprised when I started covering up with plastic, and that was just a couple months ago now. So I'm totally new to the idea of doing it, but I've just had such terrific results from covering with just a simple sheet of plastic, just an old plastic bag, that I just keep shouting the praises of using that approach. So I've got a feeling we're gonna find the material throughout this bin to be nice and cozy, nice and damp. A couple corn cobs, usually a popular item. A couple worms nearby, but as soon as I scraped down, I got right into a layer of dry leaves. I would say that they're not dry per se, they're not crumbly or crackling. So we're not very far from a layer of bedding that was placed right beneath these food scraps. It's clear that these food scraps were not dug down deep. I believe they just came along with the worms. Got some other food scraps here, a banana stem. I guess what we'll probably do here, I didn't really come in here with any sort of a set plan, but I guess I can always just go back to playing the hits. My preferred place to feed, usually in the beginning of a bin's life, is right down the middle. Keep it kind of simple. When I originally built this bin, I didn't really keep very tight tabs on how it was built, but I did mark it off in my tracking spreadsheet as this bin already having received one feeding, because in addition to a lot of this cardboard and leaves, bedding material that was placed in here for them, I had scattered little segments of food. I believe I had created 4 pockets. Maybe if we just examine one of those 4 corners, we'll see maybe a little bit more evidence of there having been food there. Maybe it does feel a little bit more damp, a little bit more castings. But that was 2 weeks ago. And there was no other food in here other than that. Naturally, all the bedding in here, all the leafy material, all the cardboard, that's just as edible to the worms. But when you place it alongside lettuce and chunks of fruit and whatnot, I think they're going to go for that softer, delicious stuff first, and leave all this bedding as a food option to use as more of a last resort, especially if you've got delicious kitchen scraps coming your way on a regular basis. So I think we've got ourselves a big enough hole here to place our feeding into. So let's just restore these old, larger chunks of food that have been sort of following along with the worms for some time now, months now. It's like an avocado shell and a banana peel stem. I think we didn't really find much other than that when we were rummaging through. We've still got room in here for a couple handfuls of food. Let's see what we can give them. So there was a huge cucumber, which I decided was way too much, so I broke it in half, so they get a half of a fairly large cucumber. You can already see where it had started getting soft and breaking down. Plus there's a whole bunch of small little particles at the bottom of this freezer bag, which I can give to them, and you know, there isn't all that much, so why don't I just empty the bag and give them the rest. The only thing I hung on to was the other half of the cucumber. We'll put that back in the freezer. So this is going to bring with it a good amount of moisture. All of this stuff, especially this cucumber, look at the size of that thing. As that starts to break down, thaw out from having been frozen, it's all going to start kicking off moisture pretty quickly. And that's going to bring up the moisture level throughout the bin, so that even though I think my initial glance, my initial impression at first glance of the material in this bin was that maybe it's a bit drier than it needs to be, I think that situation is going to change pretty quickly here. As soon as this material that we just added, all this fresh veggies and fruits, starts to thaw out, it's going to become a really cozy spot for them. Before we close up shop here though, and we cover up the feeding zone, let's include a little bit of grit to go along with that food. And I got some coffee left here, but we're not going to give them all of it. I'll give them maybe half of what remains. I think dumping out the rest of what's in this box would be a bit much, so this seems like enough. So now our African Nightcrawlers are looking like they're doing okay in here. From what we could see so far, we didn't really see many. And I think that's attestable to a couple things. Number one is that I didn't really have the food in one specific concentrated area like I normally do when I feed in one spot. So the worms were just going all over the place in this bin looking for all the different sections where I had placed food. But going forward, we will be feeding in one particular spot that we always know where that is. And on this go around, it's down the middle. So when we come back here, we'll know where to check. But we always leave a marker, or not always, but usually. So why don't we put a marker there to show where we last fed. For me, it's the used coffee filter. I think we'll have no problem finding the feeding zone next time we come back, but it's just kind of a fun tradition to include a little marker and also observe how it gets broken down over time, because that'll get beaten up pretty much in a few weeks, I think. They usually don't last much more than 3 or 4 weeks, being right there on the surface. So I like what I'm seeing here. This bin looks pretty cozy. We didn't really spot many worms this go around, but I sort of expected that. I expected that they'll just be scattered throughout the material. But now that we're going to start feeding them in a concentrated location, I got a feeling next time we come back here, we're going to find quite a few worms. So we'll probably check in here in another week's time or so. It was a little bit unusual for me to wait 2 weeks before even taking a peek inside this bin. It's just not characteristic of me to be that way. I'm always very hands-on and checking after everything, making sure everything's okay. But in this case, for whatever reason, I felt pretty confident that the bin I had created was going to be a cozy home for them and that they would be okay in there. So I didn't sweat it too much and I just left them be. So yeah, I'm glad to see how they're doing. They're doing quite nicely, and I guess we'll check back in with them in a little while, maybe in another week or so, see how they're doing on that feeding. But before we go, let's take a quick peek in here, because I'm also very curious about what the deal is in here. This is the stuff that did not get through the sifting process. Larger chunks of bedding and food that occupied the bin with those African Nightcrawlers in their previous home. I had also thought that after a little bit of sitting, a little bit of a chance to dry, that a lot of this might just crumble more readily, such that it could actually go through a sieve. But since I've had that plastic over the top of it, it really has not had much of a chance to air out, so I don't sense that there's much more crumbly material in here than there was previously. Funny thing is, I'm not seeing any worms. But you know, when it comes to cocoons, you know, I'm more inclined to trust that they're probably there even though I'm not seeing them. Just because I'm not seeing them, I'm not inclined to think that they're not there. And it makes me wonder if this thing is occupied by worm cocoons. Is there anything wrong with the environment so that they would hatch out? Is it damp enough? I hope it is. I wonder if, you know, if all I would have to do is add some water and the next thing you know there's worms all over the place. But it seems like it's doing all right just with the plastic covering. I used the dampness of the paper that actually it's actually quite wet, you know, so it's keeping everything a really good consistent moist level throughout the container, and nothing seems overly damp. So I guess we'll check in on this a little bit every time we look at the ANCs. Maybe we'll start seeing worms, maybe not, I don't know. But if nothing else, eventually I do want to just start getting that material back into the mainstream bin that the African Nightcrawlers are in, because it is a bunch of really partially, you know, it's great material still. I saw banana peel stems in there. I saw a whole bunch of good bedding that's still completely usable. So going forward, maybe we just use this as a bedding material under our feedings and try to work it back into the container. But at the same time, try to see if we can spot any baby worms emerging from cocoons in this. So we'll see. All right, everyone. That's pretty much it. That's our first check-in with our African Nightcrawlers now that they have moved from the Vermibag tote into this little green tub. And it is a pretty small tub. Not very large tub at all. And at some point, I would like to get them into a larger space. But for now, it seemed like this would be adequate just to get them going again in a new environment. And at some point soon, we'll get them going. Maybe in a tub, maybe in a bag again. We'll see. I haven't decided yet. So stay tuned. We'll be checking in on this regularly. And there's always something going on here. So if you're into this sort of stuff, then be sure to subscribe. If you hit the bell, you'll get notified of new content online. And if you do, then that must mean you liked it. And if you did, please be sure to leave me a quick like, quick thumbs up, just to show that you enjoyed the video. That's really appreciated. And also put a comment down below if you have any questions or comments. I always love seeing everyone's comments. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.